Some of these 70s sci-fi movies failed financially. Others failed to connect with audiences or critics at the time. But all of them eventually became cult films. And if you missed any of these, they're still well worth revisiting today. Coma follows Dr. Susan Wheeler, who uncovers a plot inside a hospital where healthy patients are deliberately placed into comas and declared brain dead so their organs can be sold. The operation is run by a senior surgeon, and as she investigates further, even the people closest to her may not be what they seem, including her own boyfriend. Behind the camera, the film was written and directed by Michael Crichton, who had already made Westworld a few years earlier. It's based on a 1977 novel by his friend Robin Cook. Genevieve Bujold and Michael Douglas are excellent as the leads. The suspense builds steadily, and the final act delivers real tension. Crichton turns the story into a slick, Hitchcock-style thriller rather than straightforward science fiction. But critics were mostly unimpressed. Reviews called the film implausible, stiff, and lacking personality, with performances described as mechanical and emotionally flat. Variety even suggested the film may have contributed to a drop in organ donor numbers and reported that one hospital removed the number 8 from an operating room door after patient complaints. Today, Coma feels like a clear precursor to films such as Outbreak and Contagion, and if this kind of medical paranoia is your thing, it's well worth a watch. A boy and his dog follows a young man named Vic, played by Don Johnson, wandering through a ruined United States with his psychic dog, Blood. In exchange for scraps of food, Blood helps Vic pursue his one real goal: getting laid. It's such an odd premise that it almost sounds like a joke, and in a way, that's the point. It wasn't a commercial hit, and the reaction was mixed. Some critics appreciated how original and unapologetically strange it was, while others didn't buy the tone at all and saw it as messy, uneven, or simply too much. And yes, it isn't a particularly brilliant or consistent movie, all things considered, but it is one that needs to be seen to be believed, if only for the weird conversations between Vic and Blood as they relentlessly move through an uncompromising post-nuclear world. Then and now, The Man Who Fell to Earth remains surreal and disturbing, and best watched around midnight. It stars David Bowie as Thomas Jerome Newton, an alien who comes to Earth looking for water to save his dying planet. Using his intelligence, he builds a vast fortune through new technology and plans a way back home. But staying on Earth takes its toll. He enters a relationship with a hotel maid, becomes dependent on alcohol, and slowly loses control. The film didn't come without problems. The Man Who Fell to Earth ran into trouble before it ever had a chance to find an audience. After seeing the finished cut, Paramount refused to pay for it, claiming it was not the film the studio had agreed to make. After all the legal back and forth, the movie ended up with only a small release in the United States. In the UK, however, it was passed uncut for adult audiences with an X rating. Quintet is Robert Altman's deliberately slow and artful take on post-apocalyptic sci-fi, and it confused critics and audiences when it was first released. Set in a distant future during a new ice age, the film unfolds in a frozen world where civilization is barely hanging on. Survivors drift through endless snow, scavenging for food and purpose, eventually gathering at the Hotel Electra, where a strange and deadly 5-sided board game called Quintet dominates their lives. The rules of the game are never fully explained, and neither are the characters' motivations. That approach didn't go over well at the time. The film was a financial disaster, and most reviews were openly hostile. It was dismissed as pretentious, impenetrable, and self-indulgent. To be fair, Quintet isn't the strongest film on this list. It's slow and not an easy watch. But for patient viewers, especially those who like films that make you work for the meaning, it can be rewarding. In The Terminal Man, a computer programmer suffers from seizures that trigger violent blackouts. He agrees to an experimental procedure that implants electrodes in his brain designed to stop the seizures with small electrical shocks. Instead of fixing the problem, the treatment makes things worse, as his brain becomes dependent on the impulses and the seizures begin to escalate. The film had a rough release. It wasn't released in the UK, it did well in Japan, and in the United States it was basically dumped with very limited screenings. There was even a disastrous preview where the first 10 minutes were projected without sound. Reviews were harsh, and one common complaint was the lead casting. George Segal was known at the time as a comedian, and some people struggled to accept him in a darker role. But The Terminal Man also picked up some serious defenders. Stanley Kubrick had already admired the director, and when the idea of a UK release came up, Kubrick's reaction was blunt. He'd seen it and thought it was terrific. Terrence Malick also wrote to the director praising the film intensely, saying it created moods he'd never experienced before and that its images pierce like an arrow. So even if it didn't land with mainstream audiences at the time, it clearly impressed a few filmmakers who knew exactly what they were looking at. And there's a good chance it might work for you too. Futureworld is the less successful sequel to Westworld, but it's still an interesting film in its own right. It returns to the idea of a futuristic theme park filled with robots so advanced that it's impossible to tell them apart from humans. Set years after the original disaster, the park's management insists everything is now under control. A new section called Futureworld is about to open, offering space travel, zero gravity, and even skiing on Mars. Two journalists are invited for an all-access preview. One is there for a glossy promo, the other for a serious investigation. It doesn't take long before things start to feel off. Futureworld never reaches the weight or impact of the original, and most of the original creative team is absent. Still, it's a fun watch, and a solid example of just how ambitious 1970s sci-fi could be, even when it didn't quite stick the landing. Directed by Joseph Sargent, Colossus, the Forbin project centers on a massive supercomputer designed to take control of the entire U.S. military defense system. Created by scientist Charles Forbin, Colossus is meant to remove human error from global security. Who could have guessed this was a bad idea, especially once it's revealed that a similar system exists on the other side of the Iron Curtain? The film opened quietly, failed to gain traction, and was pulled from theaters. It was re-released later that summer for a wider showcase run, where it still struggled, topping out at around $150,000. But despite the weak box office, critics were noticeably kinder this time around. Reviews highlighted the film's intelligence, restraint, and satirical edge. Over the years, its reputation only grew stronger, eventually earning a high approval rating and being cited by genre publications as one of the standout science fiction films of its era. And the film has aged remarkably well. In some ways, it even plays better today, now that we're living in the era of AI and ongoing geopolitical tension. Dark Star is a low-budget sci-fi comedy about the crew of a spaceship tasked with destroying unstable planets that could threaten humanity's future expansion. The ship barely works, the crew is exhausted, situations grow increasingly absurd, and at one point there's even an alien that looks like a beach ball. More than enough reasons to give it a watch. But when it was released, it didn't leave much of an impression. Many people brushed it off, and the film quickly faded into the background. Over time, though, it found a second life. It's still fun, unpretentious, and easy to watch. And let's also note that this is where both John Carpenter and Dan O'Bannon started, a few years before Halloween and 5 years before Alien.